Hello everyone, how's it going? It's Nadie and welcome to our series that I haven't quite named yet. As you beautiful people know, any tiff you may have, please cast it away because this is a channel of positive energy, okay? Thank you. Oh, my little knitting Nancy's, how you doing today? I hope wherever you're at in the world, you're just having a great day so far. I myself am doing wonderful. I'm really excited. I've kind of been working on these stories for a while. So I would love your help on a name for this. We're basically going to be talking about weird things that happened all over the world, recent things, stuff that happened hundreds or thousands of years ago, but each topic and story kind of makes you think, what is life? The point of this series is to kind of make you question everything. Do UFOs exist? Why do random plagues cause thousands of people to dance? Or how did little green children just happen to show up in a village? These stories all happen, but we might not know exactly why they happened. And one of my besties suggested like mystery moment, and I think that's a good jumping off point, but I feel like we could come up with something with a little bit more pizzazz. Something that you could print on a t-shirt. So if any of you have suggestions, please comment down below. I figured we could just sit and tell stories and knit. Right now I'm working on a blanket, even though I've got about 50 of them behind my couch. Do I need another goddamn blanket? Hell no. But it keeps my fingers happy. So for today's stories, I actually kind of mentioned them. Our first one is the dancing plague. Have you heard of this bullshit? Well, back in medieval times, hundreds of people just started randomly dancing like they couldn't resist the urge. It was like trying to resist smelling a churro stand. It's impossible, but churros are a million times better. Because once these people began dancing, these bitches couldn't stop for months. And this shit was serious too, like people died. Well, mama, get your dancing shoes ready for this one because it is wild and honestly, the theories might be true. Okay, so let's rewind this little cassette tape back over 500 years to Strasbourg in 1518. It was a beautiful July morning. The sun was just rising and everyone was waking up to scrape the bird shit off their horse and buggy to go to work. One woman named Frau left her house as she did every morning to go grab a chocolate baguette from the bakery down the alleyway. But suddenly it was like Uptown Funk was playing through her head and she simply had to start dancing. But then that head bop turned into chest wiggles, which then turned into a whole routine like the Thriller dance. She moved all morning, she moved all afternoon, and well into the evening, until finally at night she collapsed into a heaping sweaty pile, just exhausted. I mean, could you blame her? She burned like 3,000 calories doing dance aerobics all day. You know, if anything, this plague made people ripped as shit. It seemed like her urge to dance was finally done and she was able to sleep. Until like 2 hours later when she woke to her body moving and grooving again. She's like, son of a bitch, I need sleep, but mama's got the boogie. So she strapped on her garters and laced up her heels and went to town dancing again. And she boogied at the market, she bopped at the library, she grooved at the deli, and eventually ended up jiving in the town square. Unfortunately though, this was a time when fashion was just for looks and Dr. Scholl's shoe inserts hadn't yet been invented, which meant that after yet another day of dancing in the streets like Martha and the Vandellas, poor Frau's shoes were full of blood and her socks were soaked with it. But rather than going home and ruining her bed sheets with the blood, Frau kept dancing in the square the whole damn night. And then all day the next day, and then all night again. For 6 days this lady was tapping the cobbles, her feet basically bloody stumps, until finally she said, you know what? Fuck this, I need help. And so she danced herself to a temple to try and be exorcised. At this point, she'd attracted like 35 people who couldn't stop dancing with her either. And soon the 35 people turned into 400 dancing queens. Everyone was jumping up, jerking around, spinning, contorting in weird ways. This was a proper mosh pit. But unfortunately, the term dancing isn't quite right because dancing is fun. This wasn't really dancing at all. In fact, all of the partakers were kind of in agony. It wasn't their choice to be dancing and they were actually crying out for help. You know when you get restless leg syndrome from lactic acid buildup and you have to move your legs? That's how this felt, but all over the body. This was involuntary movement and the people passing by went from happiness to horror when they saw the looks of pain in the dancers' faces. Suddenly, people were collapsing from exhaustion, falling into a pile and still moving on the ground like a zombie. Then the exhaustion turned to strokes and heart attacks and 15 people a day were dying because of this uncontrollable movement. This was fucking pandemonium, man. And nobody knew what the hell to do. The authorities were like, well, this is probably fake. Let's let them dance and hope it runs its course. But I mean, you don't dance until you stroke out because you're faking it. Really, all anyone could do was assume that this mysterious disease would leave the body as quickly as it entered. So everyone was just encouraged to dance and keep the boogie going. A center was opened in the middle of town for the infected dancers to dance together. A little food court was open so they could get nibbles betwixt their two-stepping. And the police thought, well, we may as well make the best out of this and give them a stage. You know, maybe if they think there's an audience they're performing to, this'll run its course faster. So the crowds would watch, but really no one was impressed because these people would just stand there jerking around like The Walking Dead. Not the best reviews from the onlookers, a solid 2 out of 5 stars. Well, that's no good, so the authorities hired professional dancers to dance alongside the people and even hired a band to play 24/7. How thoughtful, right? Unfortunately though, instead of helping cure this plague, this festival that they'd now created encouraged even more people to join in. And suddenly half the town couldn't stop dancing. What the hell was causing this outbreak? Well, looking back, it turned out that this wasn't the first time this shit happened, it was just the most famous occurrence of it. In fact, this had happened several times before all over Europe. One of the first outbreaks was in 1021 in Germany when a group of people outside of a church began uncontrollably dancing on Christmas Eve. I'm sure they were excited for Christmas carols and prezzies, but still, for almost 20 people to just randomly start dancing at once, that's a bit suspicious. Even when the priest came out in his nightgown and told the group to shut the hell up and stop dancing, they refused, they joined hands, and continued dancing in a big circle. The poor man who just wanted his beauty sleep for his Christmas morning sermon said, you know what, screw all y'all, I curse you bitches to dance for a year straight, how about that? And you can bet your vag lupa that's exactly what they did. The next year, on Christmas of 1022, the group finally stopped dancing and collapsed into an exhausted sleep, which quite a few of the dancers never even woke from. That would literally be me after a single night at the club nowadays. Roll forward like 200 years to Germany in 1247 and then again in the Netherlands in 1278 when 200 people randomly started dancing on a bridge like a fucking music video. Everyone thought it was a grand old time till they went so hard the damn bridge collapsed and everyone drowned in the Moselle River. Again, 2 out of 5 stars. Onlookers really didn't recommend it. But it wasn't stopping. In 1374, the compulsion to dance swept across Germany once more. It moved to the Netherlands, to Belgium, to France, and even England. And this wasn't just like 3 people. This was entire towns and villages just randomly dancing like a flash mob at Macy's. People just needed to dance, and if they didn't, they felt like they'd die. And left and right, people were getting really fucked up from dancing injuries. Someone would fall and break a leg or a foot or a labia. They'd have internal bleeding or punctured organs from the breaks, and after 6 months of dancing with an injury, they'd literally die on their feet mid-sachet. At first, because this was the olden times and everything from gray hair to someone's period was blamed on the devil, people just assumed that these were sinners and had done some dirty shit and were now paying the price. Even when people would go to churches or religious temples, they realized nothing would help, because soon reports were coming in that even monks were infected with the plague now. Not the fucking monks! Another idea was floating around that these dancing victims were hysterical from eating a fungus that was grown on their barley. After all, that particular fungus caused psychedelic effects similar to LSD, so maybe everyone was just tripping balls after eating Gwendolyn's cookies. Sounds like a hell of a good time to me. Gwendolyn, I'll buy 2. And it does kind of make sense because literally everyone ate the shit, and even if they'd had pesticides, it really wouldn't matter because they don't protect against this fungus anyways. But looking into it, if they had been infected by this fungus, they probably wouldn't have had the energy to keep dancing. Like after a day, they would have dropped it like it was hot and kept it low for the rest of the night. It certainly wouldn't have made anyone dance for like a week, a month, or even years. Probably the closest theory we'll ever find is a phenomena called mass psychosis illness, which is basically a huge ass hysteria fest brought on by massive amounts of stress, which sounds pretty plausible because stress can come in many forms and it can totally fuck you up the anus. Like I've met people who get UTIs when they're stressed. I personally get incredibly tense and sick and I've been hospitalized, and other people just pop a pill and the stress is gone. But we didn't have those magical tiny pills back then, did we? Psychologists believe that the dancers were in kind of a trance, otherwise how would they have been able to keep going for so long? In fact, it's since been proven that stress and anxiety can cause the mind to go into a trance-like state to cope. You know, when you're drinking that cup of espresso and you're just kind of in a haze? Imagine that, but like times 1,000, and that's what it was like to live hundreds of years ago. For that first plague that we talked about, the most famous one, the entire community was very distressed and now in even more of a panic because of the dancing plague. First of all, people only lived till they were 30 if they were lucky. They all had hungry, unwanted children to feed, and if someone sneezed on you, it was basically a death sentence. And to top that, the town's crops were shit that year, which not only meant that they themselves were dying of malnutrition, but they weren't able to sell those crops to make money to buy other things. And if that wasn't enough of a fuck you from the universe, there were outbreaks of smallpox, leprosy, syphilis, and now what they called the English sweat. This is what they were calling the dancing plague in the early stages, which they thought was a curse caused by Saint Vitus, who apparently had the power to control their minds and force them into dancing. So needless to say, this was a very stressful time in life and kind of explains why 400 people were joining in. But what do you think? Do you think it was stress? Do you think it was the fungus? The mania seemed to have died out sometime in the 17th century, so maybe we'll never know, but this forever will be an intriguing curiosity. curiosity, will it not? We've all heard of the Incredible Hulk, of green Martians, of being green with envy, but who are the green children of Woolpit? King Stephen, not to be confused with Stephen King, had ordered that these big-ass pits be dug up all around the outskirts of town in order to capture wolves. Well, one day, the townsfolk were going around the holes doing their daily checking, when I'll be damned if standing next to one pit wasn't a little green boy and girl, just chilling there looking like they were covered in vomit or mashed peas. The pair were apparently brother and sister, and other than their green hue, seemed to be perfectly normal. No little space antennas, and Rod Sterling was nowhere to be seen to let them know they were in the Twilight Zone. One monk that had seen them wrote that their skin was like no mortal that inhabited the human world, for it was tinged with a green color. But these poor kids couldn't speak a lick of English, which confused the hell out of the villagers. Like, how did these kids get here and travel far enough that they had an entirely different language? The brother and sister could speak to each other no problem, but it was going to be impossible for the village to figure out what these kids wanted, what they needed, what they liked, and most importantly, what the fuck planet they were from. Still though, the village ladies adored the kids, putting them in clothes that complemented their green skin tones, and everyone soon found out that these kids only ate broad beans. Now, if you don't know what a broad bean is, here in the States we call them fava beans. They're just medium-sized beans that kind of look like edamame. Unfortunately, shortly after the brother and sister's new arrival to this land, the little boy ended up growing very weak and dying. The sister, though, was determined to keep healthy, and no matter what, she ate her kale, she downed her legumes, she exercised on the regs, and ended up living a long and happy life. And with time, as she adapted to the village's food, she went from Alphaba to Glinda. She was normal color again. She began going to school in town and eventually learned English, something everyone was dying for her to do, because now she could tell the village all about where she'd come from. About damn time, too. Shit. Well, according to her, she and her brother were from what she could really only describe as another world. A world where everyone and everything was green. I know, I'm sure you're thinking this sounds like it's straight off a green bean can, but it does sound kind of lovely, doesn't it? Probably hard to find a good foundation match, though. Not only was everything lush and green, but I guess the sun never really fully rose either. They were constantly in a state of twilight, sans the cheesy vampires. While in their homeland, I guess they could see across the river, but nobody really ever crossed it to explore because they were in such a fabulous paradise. Would you? Shit, other than having skin like a leprechaun, it sounds like a fabulous vacation destination. Later, the girl, now a woman, claimed that this place was called St. Martin. One day, while the sister and brother were herding sheep and cows near a cave, they'd heard the most beautiful sound of bells ringing off in the distance. And naturally, being curious cats and kittens, they went to explore this foreign noise. It was believed that these bells came from the nearby cathedral town of Bury St. Edmunds. This was only about 2 miles away, and this was well before the town's famous cathedral was built, but nonetheless, they still had a modest church with mighty bells. But still, the townspeople thought that was very odd that nobody had ventured 2 miles to an actual town. This is like that M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong movie, The Village. Have you seen that? God, I love that movie. The young girl grew up, she adjusted to her new life, and was invited to live in Sir Richard's castle, which sounds great and all, like tea, cakes, and bubble baths all day, but she was there to be his servant. Still a good gig though, at least she wasn't green and stuck in the wilderness. She met a man in the nearby town of Norfolk who was believed to be an ambassador for King Henry II, like that is fancy. In later years, when the girl's past was looked into even further, researchers found that she was given the name Agnes. But even to this day, the town still wonders why Agnes and her brother were green. Villagers thought maybe they'd been poisoned with arsenic, which apparently can turn the skin green? Maybe they'd been left by their guardian or robbed of their money and forced to do labor and then just left? But a bit more plausible of an explanation is that the kids were suffering from hypochromic anemia, aka chlorosis? I think that's how you say it. Maybe it's chlorosis. But the word chlorosis comes from the Greek word chlorine, which translates to the blend of yellow and green. And this condition is often caused from a poor diet. Maybe if you only eat fava beans, the lack of nutrition could cause a green hue. So that's probably figured out, but where in the hell did these kids even come from? Out of all the theories, I think the most believable is that these kids were Flemish orphans who stumbled into a village after battle. At this time in 1173, there was quite a big war going on, and Henry II had a huge number of Flemish immigrants fighting. Thousands of people were killed at the settlement near St. Martin's where the kids said they were from. And if they were Flemish immigrants, that would explain the language barrier and why the English-speaking natives thought this Flemish sounded just like gibberish. It's just an assumption, but it's probably safe to bet that these kids saw their parents being killed and fled to Thetford Forest for who knows how long. Could this dense forest be what they considered a twilight world? And in the area they had originally wandered from, there were tons of underground mine passages that the kids plants could have wandered through, which may have been what they considered to be caves. Other theories from infamous astronomers thought that maybe these children were indeed aliens that came to Earth. That'd be cool, I'm down with that theory. In 1621, there was even a writing published that thought these kids fell from the heavens. People thought that maybe the children's home was trapped in an area behind the sun, which would kind of explain the whole Twilight feel. And their green skin, well, that's because they were actually eating genetically modified food from their home planet. So it made sense when their skin cleared up and they became a normal color with real food. Though I do love me a good extraterrestrial moment, I'd probably put money on the whole hypochromic anemia theory, especially if they'd been wandering around for who the hell knows how long. But what do you think? Were they malnourished? Did they actually fall from the sky? Were they from a different planet? It kind of makes you wonder, and it's the main reason why we have to question everything. Honestly, next episode, I'm probably not going to be wearing pants because this blanket is making my lap hella warm. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. I just love having you. And if you want a little bit more me in your life, head over to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/poplux. You get videos a day early, you get Patreon-only content, and best part, it's cheap, fun, and fancy just like me. Comment down below, let me know what you thought of this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter at officialnady, and you can follow me online at thepoplux.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all, and I will see you again soon. Bye!